Well, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to welcome you to the Global Air Quality Monitoring session. And our first speaker for today is Carl Malings. Over to you.
All right, thank you. All right, so in this talk, I'm going to give a little bit of an overview of the project that myself and the team listed on the slide here is going to be working on for this round of HAQAST, which is scaling data fusion tools to support local air quality managers in Latin America. And at a very high level, the goals for this project are to improve city-scale forecasts of key air pollutants like PM2.5, NO2, ozone for these local air quality managers through the integration of multiple data sources, including, of course, NASA model and satellite resources, as well as satellites from other organizations, and the local or in situ data that's being collected on the ground by these agencies themselves. And we're going to be implementing that system in a cloud-based computing platform, Google Earth Engine. And this is to facilitate the transfer of this system to operation by these local users during the project. And then after the project is concluded, they'll still have access to that system and be able to run these forecasts themselves. And our final goal here is to assist them in interpreting the outputs of this system to support specific needs. For example, decisions about where to site new air quality monitors, or in a specific case, preparing for the upcoming Maya mission, which was mentioned, I think, at these talks previously. So the partners for this, we're working with three cities in South America here. So first, we have Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. This is actually an ongoing collaboration we have with Rio de Janeiro, where we've already implemented a prototype of this forecasting system with them. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but we're going to continue this partnership and build upon it to address some of their priorities. As I mentioned, the siting of new air quality monitors in the city is something we're looking into for this. The first new partnership we're building is with the Maule regional government in Chile. This is just south of Santiago, the capital, which is one of the target areas for the upcoming Maya mission. So in addition to just providing the forecast data, which is useful in itself to this organization, the hope is that we'll be preparing them to make better use of the Maya data when it's available and provide sort of a complement to the Maya mission in terms of us providing near real time and forecast information, and then a couple weeks later, when the Maya data is processed, they'll have retrospective information that they can look at in a little bit more detail. And then finally, we're thinking of expanding to Bolivia, La Paz, and Santa Cruz. Originally, this was through partnership with the U.S. State Department. There have been some changes at the State Department, of course, this year. So we're looking into other opportunities to connect with local researchers and continue or modify our plan a little bit to accommodate what they might be interested in. But overall, the idea, just to quickly go through the methodology, is to combine, as I said, data from multiple sources. So this starts with model-based data from NASA's Goddard Earth Observing System Composition Forecast, or GOCF model. This is run every day and produces a 5-day global forecast of atmospheric constituents, including several things that are relevant for air quality. And it's doing so at roughly a 25-kilometer resolution globally. So that's a bit too coarse for a city-scale air quality manager. So the next step is to bring in the satellite data, which tends to be at a finer resolution, depending on the exact product we're looking at. And this can give us information on the spatial variability at a spatial scale finer than what the model is able to resolve. So by combining those two data sets, we can get more spatially resolved information. And finally, by bringing in the data from the ground-based monitors, we can really correct to the specific local conditions at the sites of those monitors and develop a more regionally specific and regionally accurate forecast based on that. And the idea is to sort of develop all these calibrations and relate these data sets to each other based on the recent past, and then extrapolate those relationships into the near future to support the air quality forecast from about 1 to 3 days ahead of time. So overall, these are some of the advantages of our system, providing spatially complete information, filling gaps, relatively high spatiotemporal resolution, certainly compared to the global model that's already available, and the ability to forecast and quantify uncertainties to guide decision makings. And some of the applications of that, which I already mentioned, just basically providing early warning, of course, but also looking at regionally specific estimates of pollution exposure for more retrospective analysis, looking at the sources of uncertainty to identify where improvements might be made in the future, and guiding, for example, based on that uncertainty, guiding the location of new ground-based monitors, for example. So I mentioned we have this partnership with Rio de Janeiro already, where we've implemented a prototype of this system. So we've worked with them over the years of this previously funded project where we developed the prototype to develop the algorithm, test it, and also implement the user interface that they use to kind of interact with the data. You can see an example of that on the slide here. And as I mentioned, we're developing this in Google Earth Engine, which has had both advantages and disadvantages. I'm happy to talk about that separately later, but for time, I'll just leave it at that. In terms of sort of more technical metrics, the performance of the forecasting system, I wanted to highlight two results here. So first, in terms of the NO2 forecasting, this plot is showing the spatial correlation metric, and on the vertical axis and the horizontal axis is showing the correlation lead time. So the dotted line in the middle there is the baseline method. So what Rio was doing before we started this project was providing a single forecast for the entire city. So there was no spatial specificity to that forecast, which is why the spatial correlation of that baseline is at 0. If we were to use just the GOCF, the global model itself, that's the blue line there. Because of its coarse resolution, it wasn't really able to resolve, and it's not designed to resolve, these intercity variabilities. So its spatial correlation with the actual measurements was actually negative. But through the data fusion method, we went to the green and then to the pink lines there. You can see improved spatial correlation. So we're able to credibly resolve the sub-city scale variability in NO2, and that's out from the 1, 2, and the 3-day forecast, and there's not much degradation in the skill, at least in terms of the spatial correlation, out at those lead times as well. Secondly, for PM 2.5 forecasting, this is another result I want to show here. So again, on the figure is showing now the normalized root mean square error on the vertical axis. Lower is a more accurate forecast, a better score is lower. And this is broken down by the hour of the day in local time. So if you're, again, using just the model itself in blue, outside of sort of the local noon times, the accuracy is actually quite low due to a bias in the representation of PM 2.5 in this area. But incorporating the satellite data in the orange line or the yellow line there improves that quite a bit. And it improves it not just during the middle of the day when the satellite comes overhead, but the information provided by that satellite is also relevant at other times of day. So you're seeing a increase in the forecast performance throughout the day. And it's comparable to the baselines in this case. And that's important for the city of Rio because in Rio, there is only one regulatory grade PM 2.5 monitor. So they were a little bit worried that if we incorporate data from that monitor, it may be too biased to that specific location. But we're showing here that even before we start incorporating data from that monitor specifically, just using the model and the satellite together is improving the forecast quite a bit just by itself. So that was another encouraging result from that. So moving forward, our next steps, as I mentioned, continuing collaboration with Rio, focusing on siting new monitors, and that's going to be supported by a new set of low-cost air quality sensors they've purchased and started deploying in the city to supplement their, as I mentioned, the single regulatory grade PM 2.5 monitor. And that'll give us some interesting information and guidance on where to site new monitors in the future. For the Maule region in Chile, we're going to start implementing the system for them. Again, as I said, preparing for the Maya mission, providing forecasts, which can eventually be supplemented by retrospective analysis data from the Maya mission. And then finally, working to identify, as I mentioned, new end users to support our planned expansion into Bolivia. So these are just some references. So I'll leave it at that, and we'll take questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. Our next speaker is Jun Saw.
Hello everyone, my name is Jun. I am a co-investigator of this project. Will be present today on behalf of the Pwan Gupta, who is the leader and PI of this project. Yeah, first I will just go over our outline of our project. So previous HAQAST period, we are focusing on developing a global PM2.5 forecasting model for US embassies and consulates. But now we will focus on Africa region only. Why? So as you know, like not enough tools to measure the serious air pollution in many African countries and cities. And also existing tools are also limited. And also clear, trusted data is needed for better health and policy decisions. So we suggested like we were going to develop the integrated tool named as AAQE, present African Air Quality Explorer. And our main objective is develop the model for easy to use online tool powered by NASA data that brings together like a historical air pollution trends and near real-time satellite images and air quality forecast and local and satellite data in one place. Yeah, so this slide shows more details. As I mentioned, we developed a beautiful PM2.5 forecasting model last period. So we adopt that existing model for these Africa problems. So we need some like a fine tuning for Africa region, but there will be no problem just tuning the model using the African data only. And then we also provide downloadable time series for 800 African cities, which have more than 100,000 population site. And we will also provide various data sources, for instance, Meta2, but ML-driven PM2.5 values, and also GeoSAP, also ML-driven PM2.5 values, and also Behrer's FCI and Aeronet and OpenAQ data through our platform. So, and also we will deploy this system on cloud, so it can be the scalable and customizable depending on the demands. And also following the NASA's policies, we will open all the code and data to the public. And then one of the biggest part for this project is like we encouraging the engagement of the end users. So we will develop the training material with the RSET team, and also we will hold a webinar and workshops. And also we closely work with the local government or local agency or international organization like World Bank. We will get the feedback from the real end users, and we will keep improving our platform during this period. Yeah, so for next couple of slides, I will explain our current capabilities. So for instance, last period, we developed this CARES system, which is a city air quality forecasting and analysis system. Let me just briefly explain our system. So we are using the GeoSAP as an input, and then we use the DOS air OpenAQ PM2.5 ground measurement as an output. And then we linked these two input and output using the advanced machine learning algorithms. So we are keep replacing or adding or adapting the new algorithm or new technologies to improve the accuracy of the PM2.5 forecasting performances. So previously, we provided this forecasting model values to the US Department of the State, and then they share this information through their beautiful platform called JEP Air to the personnel working at US embassies and consulates. But early this year, the DOS Air program was terminated, and as a result, like we could no longer deliver the information through this platform. So we developed our own web API. So we are keep providing the forecasting value to the more than 500, maybe we have some numbers at here. Yeah, 270 US embassies, consulate, and 1,000 active Aeronet sites and 5,000 OpenAQ locations to keep evaluating evaluate our models result, and also keep increasing the data volume to improve our models. And also for this period of project, like we added 800 African cities. We already ran our initial model and get some result, and we will publish these kinds of data after when we complete these shutdown issues. Yeah, so we will not develop the new model from the scratch. We will just editing or modifying our current capability. For instance, the previous HAQAST cycle, we successfully partnered with the US EPA and NOAA to develop and implement a bias correction of the hourly PM2.5 product using the combinations of the geostationary satellites and model product and machine learning algorithm. So we plan to scale the approaches to for Africa using a new generation of satellites like FCI. And another work, also we are scaling our approaches to estimating hourly PM2.5 using the geostationary satellites from the US data before, but transport learning, we will use the Africa data to use for the Africa regions. So I think Salman yesterday explained these kinds of things during the poster session. So maybe if you have questions, Salman can answer your specific question about the algorithm and models. And then the last, we are collaborating with other NASA's group like AeroNet and SNWG to expand the ground-based monitoring of atmospheric particles for the calibration and validation of the satellite data. And then this becomes very important because I already mentioned that the Air program was terminated. So we are keep installing the local sensor just next to the AeroNet equipment and also reference monitor, and then keep validating the local sensors values as well, and also our models product as well. So just simple, our idea is like we already have a very great performance equipment AeroNet, so we are just installing the local sensor just next to that equipment and try to build up the bridging model between the AeroNet's AOD values to the PM2.5 value. Yeah, so this map shows the locations of the installed low-cost sensors. So currently, our ground monitoring network includes more than 40 Clarity nodes and 50 Purple sensors and new 10 AeroNet sites. And then the figure on the right below shows like our example model's performances. We just use the AeroNet aerosol as an input and then PM2.5 as an output. And then we compare it with the reference values. We both use like reference monitors, PM2.5 values, and also low-cost sensors values. Yeah, that's all for today from our side. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Our next speaker is Patrick Behrer from the World Bank.
So I just want to start by thanking the organizers for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here. A number of people have asked, though, why the bank is here. What is the bank's interest in air pollution? So I'm going to focus mostly today on talking about the agenda that we're working on air pollution within the research group at the bank and how I think satellite data and monitoring data fits into that. I think the first reason that we're interested in this question is because it's extremely relevant for the client countries that we work in. Air pollution is a problem in much of the world, but it is an acute problem specifically in the places that the bank works. And it's especially a problem for some of the poorest people in the world, who are the people that we are most focused on helping. But the other reason that I'm super interested in this is that I think everyone here knows that air pollution is a major problem for health. There's been an enormous amount of research over the last 30 years documenting how bad air pollution is for people's health and morbidity. Increasingly, though, we know that it is a big problem for other aspects of human welfare. So human capital accumulation, worker productivity, labor supply, general economic growth. And so the ability to document these adverse effects across human sort of welfare relevant measures that are not related to health is super important for motivating change on air pollution in the places that we work. And this last point, the costs of air pollution being much larger than a health-based approach might suggest, to the extent that we can show that rigorously, it motivates a lot of investment or a lot of willingness to invest in programs to reduce air pollution in these countries. So I said that we have this growing understanding that air pollution impacts welfare relevant things other than health. I think there are still some significant gaps in what we know about that. And our agenda is designed or is targeted at trying to address 3 of these gaps. The first is that we just have very few well-done studies on these questions. So this is from a recent meta-analysis that is coming out soon. Air pollution and morbidity, air pollution and mortality are the 2 columns in the middle. You can see we know vastly more about that than we know about these other outcomes. So air pollution and student attendance, infant morbidity or mortality, air pollution and productivity, or air pollution and test performance. We have some evidence, but we don't have nearly enough to say that there's a robust evidence base, and especially we don't have enough information to put specific magnitudes on those effects that you could then include in something like a cost-benefit analysis. And so building the knowledge base in these specific outcome areas is something that we're extremely focused on. The other gap is that most of the work that we have on these non-health questions comes from wealthy countries, either the United States or in Western Europe, where pollution levels are a fraction of what they are in most of the countries that we work in. So having better evidence from the places where we work, where pollution levels are 5 to 10 times higher than the places where most of these studies have been conducted in the past, is super important. And that's true, I think, for 2 reasons. The first is that we might just expect the effects to be different. The marginal impact of an additional unit of pollution, somewhere where the average level of pollution is 55 micrograms per cubic meter, might be very different than when the average level of pollution is 8 micrograms. The other reason that it's important is a little bit more prosaic, but it is empirically true that policymakers in countries outside of the rich world strongly prefer evidence from their countries to evidence from the rich world. Even if the underlying relationship is a physiological one that we don't necessarily expect to change in India versus the United States, it is far more motivating for a policymaker to see the magnitude of an effect being estimated on Indian citizens than on American citizens or Pakistani citizens. It doesn't matter what country we're talking about. Evidence from that country is much more important than evidence from the rich world. And then the last one, which I'll just touch on briefly, because I think it's a little bit less relevant for this audience, but it's going to take a very long time to reduce pollution levels in, say, the Indo-Gangetic Plain to levels what we see in the United States. That's a decades-long project. Understanding what we can do in the meantime to reduce individuals' exposure to those high levels of ambient pollution is super important, because that's where you're going to get a lot of the welfare gains over the next 10 to 20 years. Okay, so to try and fill those 3 gaps, we're focused on a variety of different research pillars. The one I want to focus on today, though, is understanding and expanding the role of information provision in motivating policy and people's individual actions. So we've already done a fair bit of work on this question, and I'm going to highlight one specific project that we did in Tbilisi, the capital of the Republic of Georgia, where we installed outdoor, as part of a broader project on understanding who in the city was exposed to high levels of air pollution and how that interacts with poverty rates throughout the city. We installed outdoor air pollution monitors around the city, and then randomly provided the information from those monitors to different households within the city and tracked how people responded to receiving that information to get a better sense of what gains can we get in terms of adaptive behavior from providing people with better information about their exposure to outdoor pollution. So this is a map of the city of Tbilisi. The orange squares here are the location of the reference grade monitors that the Ministry of Environment in Tbilisi had installed prior to our intervention. These are basically the only monitors, low cost or otherwise, that existed in the city prior to our intervention. We then installed 40 low-cost monitors in various different places around the city, selected to be representative of both the elevation and poverty gradients across the city. So you can't see it on this map, but Tbilisi has a pretty significant elevation gradient. The center of the map, the center of the city sits down in a bowl, and it's surrounded by mountains on the outside. And so there are meaningful differences in pollution exposure as you move across the city because of that elevation gradient. There are also substantial differences in wealth as you move across the city. The wealthiest individuals in the city live in the center of the city, where pollution tends to be highest, and the poorest individuals live on the outskirts of the city, where because of the elevation, pollution levels tend to be lower. What we find when we do the RCT, though, is not particularly uplifting, I guess. Our outdoor treatment, so providing information about outdoor levels of exposure, basically has no effect on individuals' health or their knowledge of pollution. You can see here in the middle, there's maybe a small positive impact on people's willingness to take actions to avoid pollution. So they increase the things like ventilating when they cook, avoiding highly polluted parts of the city, which we tell them about. But we don't see that translating into benefits for their individual health. We do, you can see in the bottom row, see big impacts of providing people with information about their indoor pollution. So one of the other things we did in this intervention is put indoor monitors in a randomly selected set of homes. And we also then provided that indoor and outdoor information to individuals. And the combination of indoor and outdoor information was extremely valuable. And we actually observe improvements in people's health at the end of the intervention. And I'm happy to talk about the details of why I think that happened later on, but I'll just say that this experience has made me a little bit more skeptical of the power of information about outdoor pollution and changing individuals' behavior. And we're very interested in replicating this intervention in other parts of the world to understand whether this is, one, unique to Tbilisi, but two, what is it about people's behavior that is sticky with respect to information about air pollution? What is it about? Why is it so hard to get people to change their behavior in ways that impact their health just by providing them with information about pollution? And are there ways in which we can provide that information that overcome that stickiness and contribute to improvements in adaptive behavior that actually translate into improvements in health? And the last thing I'll end on is a wish list for what I would like to be able to do with satellite data. I wrote this before the session yesterday, and the first two, after seeing the poster sessions and the presentations this morning, I realized are basically already happening. So that makes me very happy. I think for the kind of work that we do, having daily highly resolved, and by highly resolved, I mean sub 10 kilometer spatial resolution estimates of pollution is extremely valuable, because that's how we estimate the dose response functions that we're especially interested in. Similarly, the forecasts are really valuable, because I think that providing one of the issues with the stickiness of people's behavior, I think, is that we provide information about pollution on that day. By the time the day has already started, your behavior might be pretty well set, even if we tell you that pollution is going to be really bad. So the ability to tell you pollution in advance could be really valuable in changing people's behavior. And then I've done a lot of work in the US on smoke plumes and wildfires. The ability to take some of the products that we have for the US in measuring emissions and measuring smoke plumes and using that kind of data in other parts of the world would be extremely valuable. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. And our last speaker for today is Colleen Rosales from OpenAQ.
Thank you, Randall. Hi, everybody. I'm Colleen, and I'm the Strategic Partnerships Director at OpenAQ. We are a nonprofit providing air quality data from all over the world in a one-stop shop platform. And I want to highlight that this is ground level data, hopefully to complement satellite data that we've all been hearing about this 2 days. So I know some of you here have already used OpenAQ or have heard about OpenAQ, and thank you for that. And so I know that a lot of us that deal with data have dealt with all of these air quality data challenges, being able to find the information, being able to, a lot of us spend a lot of time in cleaning up the data, aligning timestamps, making sure that all of the hours in a day are covered, and then for example, averaging out all of the data. So that's one problem. And the other one is, where do I find these data? I spend so much time looking for where they are stored, etc. And so this is the problem that we're trying to solve at OpenAQ. So we are a data aggregator, and we sit in the in this middle of use cases where there are ground level air quality data, both from reference monitors and air sensors. So there's people on the ground that measure this air quality data. We aggregate them in one platform, and we harmonize and standardize these air quality data to be used by diverse users. So what I'll highlight here are some use cases. And what we've seen so far, people use these type of data for. Okay, so just a little bit of introduction about the team. We're a very small team. Two of us are here today. Min is our Applied Data Fellow. If you have technical questions about the API and things like that, she'll be the best person to answer that. But otherwise, you can also come to me for any questions. But so we are celebrating our 10 years this year. We do have our 10-year anniversary page. So if you want to visit that and see the how we've grown throughout these years. We started aggregating reference monitor data, and starting in 2021, we started aggregating air sensor data as well. Again, as I mentioned, we are a nonprofit, and we're happy to collaborate with folks. If you say, for example, want to support the continuous provision of free air quality data for everybody, let's talk. Okay, so when we say OpenAQ, there's the nonprofit and there's also the platform. Our main data product is the API, and you can access the API through the R client and Python SDK. And this is our recommended way for you to access the data in OpenAQ. We do also have a user-friendly interface, the Explorer, which I'll do a little bit of walkthrough here. So there's over 2 billion data points in over 21,000 locations, 139 countries, 14 plus new scientific and media uses each month. We mostly focus on air quality data. There's other sizes of PM available as well, although a bit more sparse. And then, as I mentioned, we both have reference monitors and air sensors. And our goal is to cover these areas that you see here that are very sparse. And that's with the help of funders as well, who fund the folks on the ground to install air sensors. So yeah, these are all as close as possible as to what the source is reporting. Yeah, you can see all of the details when you access the API. What's really nice about the API is also, especially if you access them through R and Python, you don't only access the concentration data, but you get averages, you get quantiles, and all other additional information like that. So it hopefully helps you save time, so you don't have to spend all of these time trying to clean up the data yourself and calculate those averages. So like I mentioned, I will go through a little bit on the Explorer here, and there's the guide. It's pretty intuitive. I don't think you'll need to read the guide, but it's there if you needed it. This one is an example of the detail page. So say, for example, you click one point in here, it brings you to the detail page. There's also a feature called the lists, which it's like your favorites or your bookmarks in your browser. You store your favorite websites, and then you can add them to your own list. So the detail page here on the right shows you a lot more information quickly about that location. Is that an air sensor? Is that a reference monitor? What provider or what manufacturer that is? What's the license, which is super important to us, that the license is something that abides to an open license. So say, for example, public domain or CC BY4 along these lines. And then you can see also time series in here, and then a quick view of, say, the last 24 hours, last 72 hours. And then you can also see diurnal plots. And if you hover over these, you'll see the quantiles as well. And then you can also download the data from here once you sign up for an account, which is free. That gives you an API key. And then from here, you can download a CSV file. The download here is quite limited, though. The download, well, I'll talk about that in a little bit, but I just wanted to also highlight the diurnal plots and the 5-number summaries that you can see in some sample questions that you can answer with these types of quick looks of data. But what I wanted to highlight is that even though you can download the data from the Explorer, it's a bit limited. So for some of you who are looking at macro scale and a lot of maybe a longer time scale, a lot more locations, you might want to use the API instead. And so here, there is a limit of 1,000 records or 30 days, whichever results to a larger file. And again, sign up is required, but it's free. And you will also have that API key to be used for your API access. Okay, so I keep talking about the API. Again, this is our main data product and the underlying thing that you access when you access the Explorer. But what I really recommend is using R and Python rather than the direct access to API. And I recommend that because we write a lot of documentation for these to kind of guide you. So if you're asking a specific type of question, I want the data for this location for this time scale. There's a lot of examples in here on how you can query that effectively. And then so that you don't have to query all of the data all the time and then filter it out. So I do invite you to check out those documentation as well. And then we are super responsive in Slack. So I do invite you to join Slack if you have questions about how to use the API as well. Or if you run into trouble or if you have feedback for us, I do recommend you to join Slack. Okay. And then I wanted to put a plug in here in one of our resources as well. So as I mentioned, we aggregate raw concentrations, ground level air quality data. But of course, there's a lot more information to be gleaned from air quality indices. So we created this air quality index hub where we collate all of the air quality index documentation for many different countries and subnational governments. So currently there are about 35 countries and subnational governments that are represented in here. And we standardize the documentation as well. So you are able to see how one country calculates AQI differently from another. It's also interactive, so you're able to put a number and what would be the sub index for that country, things like that. So I do invite you to check that out. It's a good learning and education tool. You can maybe use it for your classes. And okay, so the last 2 minutes here, I wanted to talk about the use cases for the data in OpenAQ. Both non-scientific and scientific use cases, but what I'm going to show here is mostly kind of scientific research. So there's global level. There's also very specific to locations, like say, for example, in here, this one is in the Democratic Republic of Congo in Kinshasa. They installed air quality sensors. And then there's also machine learning in here. And then some education and awareness apps. Some of these we don't maintain, but we have heard about people using them. So if you want to read more about these use cases and are curious, you can also check out our Medium. And then these are some more of the folks that we know that have installed reference monitors and wanted to share their data in more of city-related projects. So for example, Peru has 34 reference monitors, and these are all available on OpenAQ. And then there's also C40 cities, breathe cities, both on air sensors, or installing air sensors. And then there's the Clean Air Catalyst that they installed reference monitors in these locations. Okay, so I wanted to also highlight satellite use cases. We've seen use cases where folks use satellite data, or ground level air quality data to validate satellite data and models that are associated with those. And then there's Melodies Monet, which is, in my understanding, is a modular type of toolkit. And one of the modules are the data from OpenAQ. And then some others that I've come across are, this one is a validation of CAMS and MERA2 data, and they use the ground level on OpenAQ. This one's for PM 2.5. The other is for ozone. So there's some use cases there. There's also use cases that are not really related to air quality. Some are using this open data set for their computer science classes or some big data applications. But yeah, the data is out there, it's open, and you're free to use this data. And we also offer trainings. Say, for example, you want to use it for your research group, you want to use it for your class, we'll be happy to be a guest lecturer or give that training to your group as well. Okay, so I'm going to end there. I do want to put a plug. If you are a user, please do answer our ongoing community survey. We want to hear from you, and we want to make the platform better. And then also, yeah, the Medium blog where we put out all the use cases. And then the ambassador program is open for 2026. So if you are working with folks who are from low and middle income countries, we do have a list of priority countries. But if you know of folks that are working in low and middle income countries who are advocates of clean air, maybe not exactly working on scientific research on air quality, but are advocates and sometimes these folks, air quality is not their day job, but they are passionate about air quality. And if you think they would benefit from a training such as this, please do recommend the ambassador program. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And now I'll invite all of our speakers up to our panel at the front. And I'll look across the audience for questions.
Online.
Go ahead if you'd like then.
I think this was for Carl from Jonathan Patz. Have you tested these results with a place that already has low-cost monitors, or only as a next step, as you mentioned?
All right, yeah, that's a good question. So we've done some development of this in U.S. cities which already have low-cost monitors. We've done a little bit of testing, and there's indications that it improves the performance, as you'd expect, maybe especially spatially, filling in some of those data gaps. That's not necessarily our priority for this project specifically. So yeah, I'll just leave it at that. I think I'll say, yeah, we've done some testing. We have it. It's not as maybe as systematic as we'd like it to be for like a publication, for example. So that's why this is, I would say it's one of our priorities for the upcoming project, to focus on Rio, which has recently deployed a bunch of these low-cost sensors, and do it a little bit more systematically for Rio compared to in the past. Some of our checks have just been kind of anecdotal assessments of the spatial distribution, but not as systematic, maybe.
Okay. And then we have a question from Stephanie for OpenAQ. Where are you pulling the data from for these sensors and monitors? Is it raw data only, or does it already have correction factors applied?
Yes. So it depends on the source. So how they report their data. So sometimes it'll be already calibrated or corrected, depending on the air sensor manufacturer's correction. Sometimes it's more raw. So it really depends on the source. And I think it's the same for reference monitors. There's some sort of calibration already on there. But we report what the source reports.
Great. Okay, I have a question for both Carl and Jun to start while the rest of the audience continues to think about their questions. And that is how you deal with the spatial autocorrelation combined with the tendency for monitors to be clustered. So for example, when one has two monitors adjacent to each other, then there's a high tendency for those two monitors to agree with each other. And withholding one of those for validation purposes then doesn't really test the skill of the model, because you're just testing the consistency of that monitor with the nearby monitor. And it's especially problematic across the global south, where monitors would tend to be clustered in cities. So I'm wondering how you think about that.
So let me just answer your question for our local sensor calibration model development. So we just collocated the 20 local sensors just next to the BAM, like a reference level monitor. And then we just measure the whole 2 months data first. And we try to build up our own calibration model, and then to compare with their manufacturer's calibration model. And then we also installed this node to the actual locations and also next to the reference monitor. And then to compare our calibration model's result and then also their model result with the actual reference monitor levels result. And then we found that it also depending on the environmental conditions and the locations and then different applications of the monitor models as well. So we understand that maybe we need to apply the different calibration model for specific locations or different conditions as something like this. So we are keep working on how to develop the global or for specific purposes calibration model. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's a really important point that you've raised about calibrating the low-cost monitor itself. That's a little different than the question I was intending to ask, which is for any monitor, that they tend to be located next to each other, and they tend to have similar values as a nearby monitor. And that then tends to plague the performance assessment when one withholds a fraction of the monitors for testing and using the other fraction for training. And so I'm curious how one deals with that spatial autocorrelation combined with the clustering of the monitors.
Yeah. So there's I guess a couple of levels that I can answer that question at. So we actually make use of the autocorrelation in sort of the final product that we provide in terms of our forecast. So the final stage of this data fusion process, I didn't talk about it in detail, but the final stage is to use the most recent closest measurement to upgrade our forecast for any given location, taking advantage of that spatial autocorrelation. So that's one aspect. But as you said, for testing, for evaluating how well it performs, you need to sort of assess, well, what if we didn't have a close by monitor? So in the paper we published describing the methodology, we did do a cross-validation test where we left monitors out of the input, and then we evaluated the performance at the left out site. So we did that cross-validation, and we did a little bit of gradation. I think not quite what you were talking about, but a little bit of breakdown of the site by the type of site it is, whether it's sort of a near road site, a more background site. And we kind of assessed the performance, and we actually saw that in certain cases the spatial autocorrelation can degrade things a little bit. And then I guess the final thing I'll mention is this is the process we're using is a multi-step. So we start with the model, we add in the satellite data, and then we add in the ground-based data in 2 phases, both in aggregate for the region we're looking at a sort of an average regional calibration, and then in the second step, a more localized calibration, which does take that autocorrelation into effect. And we can see as we move from one step to the next, the relative changes. And that's kind of what I showed for Rio is, the worry is there's only one monitor location. So if we're assessing against that monitor location, but we're using it as an input, that's not really a fair assessment. Or we see an improvement in performance, but obviously we'd see an improvement in performance because we're assessing against the same site. So that's where we looked back and we looked at a previous phase. If we just use the model in satellite without incorporating the ground-based data, evaluate that against the ground-based data, that's a little bit more of a fair assessment of the general performance if we weren't in a place near the monitoring site. So those are a couple strategies that we've used in our particular thing, but I think the general point is very important that, if you just evaluate at sites without considering that, it could be a little bit over-optimistic in terms of the assessed performance. So we try to be careful with that and kind of present the performance in multiple ways and kind of speaking with our users, kind of explain these caveats to, well, this is the performance when assessed in this way, but this doesn't take into account this effect. This does take into account this effect, and this is why you see a difference. And that understanding and explaining that process to them, I think has helped them kind of see the pitfalls that the approach might fall into in certain locations and have a little bit of understanding of how they should treat the model outputs that we're giving them in different situations, putting more or less faith in them in different situations.
Wonderful. Thanks for that. I see a question from Jeff, and then CON, and then.
This is a related question that I was thinking about when I saw Carl's talk. The GOCF negative 0.6 correlation blew my mind, and I can imagine how it happens where you have like your 50 by 50 kilometer grid box, and you have a site that's like a knock site that's roadside and one that's far.
Yeah.
But that's amazing. Do you think that would generally be true for any grid box that's over an urban area globally, or do you think it might be limited because it's just so strongly anti-correlated?
Yeah, I think it's a bit specific to the site. So it's the idea is like we have a boundary between two grid cells, and there's only 4 or 5 monitors we're assessing against. So that the boundary is taking into account, well, this whole region tends to be slightly higher than this whole region here. But for those 2 specific monitors, it just so happens to be that the relationship is opposite. So you're seeing that big negative number there. So I think it's a little bit specific to this city, but the idea is, and you wouldn't expect the model at that scale to capture these interurban variability. So that we sort of expected we wouldn't see good performance by this metric specifically. If you look at other metrics, just in terms of the accuracy for NO2, it's not, it's a little bit more reasonable in terms of capturing the general patterns and trends, or if you just look at overall bias. But I want to specifically highlight the spatial correlation there, because that's one of the goals we're trying to get at in this project specifically, is to resolve those intra-urban variability and be able to do that for a forecasting, which just to show that we can do it. And and this, again, to answer your question, I guess I wouldn't expect it to be generally that it's is negative point whatever everywhere, but you shouldn't be surprised if you see these high negative autocorrelations if you're zoomed in really on a city and you're looking at the intra-urban variability specifically.
And Knox is probably the worst.
And Knox is, worse for that anyway.
Yeah, I see first a question from CON, and then Ahmed, and then Talat.
Hi, I have a question for Colleen and Patrick. It's very amazing to see your works and how you focus on Global South. It's like there are still a lot of questions that they need to discover about air pollution in Global South. So my question is like, our funding is not unlimited. So if you have limited fundings, do you have an algorithm or like the way to place new observations more effectively, or do you can decide priority, like which city, which part, or like rural, urban? It's just that's my question.
Yeah, for us, we don't necessarily have an algorithm, but we do have a priority list. And it's also dependent on, sorts of funders that fund us to, say, for example, I'll give a specific example. So EPIC, the Energy Policy Institute at the University of Chicago, has funded a lot of groups that have put air sensors and reference monitors in what they call high opportunity areas. And as part of this grant, they are required to share their data openly. And to fulfill that, they work with us. And all of the air sensors that and reference monitors that they selected all have the kind of pipeline to make their data open. Maybe that's to us, maybe to another platform. But if they do choose to, share it with us, we work with these groups as well. So that's one prioritization. The other is just in general, our strategic plan is to increase data in low and middle income countries. So if it's kind of a low hanging fruit, there's a reference monitor or an air sensor placement in these areas. And it's a new source that we found. yes, we'll aggregate it. If it's a already available API, an already public API, we'll aggregate those. And then we also work with institutions as well, and then government agencies that do want to put their air sensors and reference monitors in a public platform, like the Peru example that I gave. So for us, really, it is like mission aligned in the strategic direction that we do prioritize low and middle income countries. But they, as they appear, and as we also are, like, have a very limited team, so we do have to have some sort of rubric in terms of the effort and time that we can realistically put ourselves. How can we, prioritize these types of sources? One thing is that, say for example, it's already an air sensor that is already a partner of OpenAQ, and we've already been ingesting data from these air sensors. So if a new one comes up, then it's an easy task for us, and that's going to be available in OpenAQ.
So I don't think that we have a specific algorithm. The way that the bank finances projects is a consequence of the negotiation between the bank, the clients, and potentially the source of funds that the bank is allocating. And so where we work and where we put monitors is the result of that negotiation process. It's not necessarily guided by a strict algorithm defining priority. Having said that, I think basically all of the countries in which the bank works have serious problems with ambient air pollution. Some are worse than others, but it's a problem in basically everywhere. So I think that negotiation driving the siting is in general fine. I will say the one thing that we are working on in the research group is designing an intervention specifically intended to test what the optimal distribution of monitors within a network is in terms of, with respect to how people respond to that information. So there's a question of like, how would you site monitors if you were trying to best understand the distribution of air pollution from a scientific standpoint? And then there's the question of how would you best site monitors in order to motivate people's behavior change using the information that comes from the monitors. And the distribution of those networks might look quite different. And so we're trying to specifically assess what the distribution of the network looks like under the second optimization condition.
Thank you. And then Ahmed had a question. And then over to Talat.
And then we have some questions online too. So
We can prioritize the in-room audience first, and then we can go back to the online.
I have two questions, one for Patrick and one for Colleen. Starting with the Patrick first. So the study which you discussed about, where actually the sensors were placed in the city to see what changes it brings in the behavior of the mass around that. My question is that what changes or like what changes in behavior were you expecting for cases of high pollution? And will it be fair to expect much change from the general public, because the onus is on the regulatory agencies, the state agencies, to draft the policies? So what were we trying to infer or conclude from that study?
No, I think that's a fair point about the onus being on regulatory agencies. I think it's air pollution is, as an economist, air pollution is the classic example of a public good. It's a thing that you can't really influence as an individual. It's the responsibility of regulatory bodies to reduce ambient air pollution. Having said that, I think there are things that you can do as an individual to protect yourself from particularly high levels of pollution. So for example, if I get information that today, a couple of years ago, I think everyone here knows that a couple of years ago, there was really bad wildfire smoke in Washington, D.C., where I live. And on days when the wildfire smoke was really bad that summer, I didn't exercise outside. And then you wait a couple of days and you either go to the gym or you work out a couple of days later when the air pollution is less bad. So those are the kinds of margins I think that people can potentially adjust on. You can do things like avoid exercising when it's really polluted. You can potentially change your route to work to avoid particularly polluted locations within the city, because not everywhere in the city is equally polluted. So I think there are margins that there's not much you can do as an individual to reduce ambient pollution directly. There are things that you can do as an individual to reduce your individual exposure to that ambient pollution. And we were hoping to see a larger behavioral change on some of those margins than what we actually observed.
On that, can we say that there is lack of awareness among the mass, that they don't understand the impact of air pollution on health, and because of that, there is no change in their immediate behavior?
So I think the lack of understanding or lack of internalizing the health damages is certainly a possibility. I mean, as part of the intervention, we gave everybody, I didn't talk about this in the presentation, but everyone in the experiment got detailed information about the health consequences of exposure to air pollution, as well as specific information about behaviors that you could take on an individual level to reduce your exposure. So that information was provided to everybody in the experiment and was continuously available for the duration of the experiment. It's certainly possible that despite providing that information, people didn't internalize the information, which is why they didn't change their behavior.
Thank you. And one question for the Colleen. So OpenAQ is doing a great job giving the data for the stations across the globe. One suggestion is that if you can also integrate some low-cost sensors which are well calibrated using OpenAQ on your platform, along with the uncertainty, it will become one stop for everyone to use. So there are already some studies which have used OpenAQ for the calibration. If we integrate that data along with the uncertainty, that will help the users more.
Yeah, thank you for that suggestion. And we're also working on, because one of the things that we also get a lot of comments about is, what types of calibrations and corrections have been done. So yeah, and again, in addition to the uncertainty. So we're working on how this could be best, this source of information could be best put into the platform. Also, making sure that this is still as efficient as possible and as scalable as possible. But yeah, thank you for that feedback.
Well, first a comment to follow up on Jeff's question and to add to Carl's reply. There was a slide showing the root mean square, the diurnal variation of the root mean square error, and that diminished around noon time. So I imagine, the errors during the high emission times early in the morning and in the evening, and when you also have low mixing, during those times, the model is not resolving, those emission differences spatially with the close resolution. And my question to the panel, and especially to those who are doing data fusion, is this: what can you comment on the value added to the accuracy of these estimates by the low-cost sensors versus the reference monitors?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think it goes back to the earlier question. That's something specifically we're trying to quantify through this project, is especially working with Rio in this context, is what is the additional value provided by these low-cost sensors. So they just, towards the end of this year, they just deployed several of these low-cost sensors. They're working on the localized calibration, and on our end, we've already implemented, I didn't show it there, but we've implemented a pipeline to bring that data in, and options to sort of toggle on and off the low-cost sensors. And so the idea is, we're going to be working on that further and analyzing what the impact is. And I also didn't go into a lot of detail here, but we're looking at the uncertainties in the forecast based on that. So we'll be able to see how the uncertainty is adjusted both overall and spatially, specifically in the specific vicinities of these low-cost sensors, based on the integration of that data. So that's sort of the insight we're hoping to provide them in terms of what's the value of these low-cost sensors. Is it worth investing in a couple of additional regulatory monitors to supplement them, or are the low-cost sensors going to be sufficient to kind of fill in the spatial gaps with only one regulatory monitor for sort of the baseline correction? So yeah, I think I don't have a sort of a general answer to that, but that's certainly a very important question that we're going to be looking into.
Yeah, I also agree with the car. And then our concern is like, for instance, we are providing the forecasting value for the 20 by kilometer by 20 by. But in that cases, we have a multiple reference monitor there and local sensor data there. But all the values are different and comparison are also different. So that means like we cannot measure the uncertainty between the reference monitor as well and also local sensor values as well. So that means like a simple way, just averaging out and then just compare that. But I think we need to think slightly differently. So for instance, if we just assume that our forecasting model as like a probabilistic approaches, that means we can make some distribution and then calculate the uncertainty based on that distribution, not just simply comparing the specific value as well. And that is one approach. And another approach is like we are thinking that like local sensors or data-driven forecasting model is better than nothing. Like, yeah, for instance, Jeff and also Jinky mentioned that like still local sensor has a very risky for high PM2.5 cases or large dust cases, right? But maybe if we can develop the specific case-driven or specific particle-driven models as well, then means maybe we can reduce the uncertainty for our forecasting model and also, yeah, calibration model as well. Yeah.
Okay, this question is for Patrick. So rather I have two questions. What was the duration of the study in Tbilisi? And the second one is like, what is the major source of heating for the people in the winter months? Because this is like a Central Asian country, it gets pretty cold in the winter. Perhaps I think the changes that we didn't see or behavioral changes was because of the source of heating, you know? So I just wanted to have your input on that. Thank you.
Yeah, so the duration of the experiment was about 6 months. So it is short term. It's possible that the behavioral changes that we observe with respect to outdoor pollution are too small to yield health effects over that time frame, but over a longer period of monitoring would have resulted in behavioral change. The only caveat I'll say to that is that we do observe behavioral changes with respect to indoor air pollution that yield health effects over that short time frame within the context of that experiment. So there are things that you can do with respect at least to indoor air pollution, which leads to your second question. So most of the heating and cooking in Tbilisi is done. So cooking is 99% LNG, and heating is some combination of LNG and district heating. So the feature of former Soviet countries, you have these big heating plants in the neighborhood that then pipe steam or hot water through the buildings in the adjoining, like that adjoin the heating facility. So it's not the case that in our context, people are burning biomass in their homes. That's basically less than 1% of the houses in our sample are using biomass.
Great. Thanks everyone for all of these questions. I know that Jenny described that there was a flash talk online that she's hoping to show, and we're nearing that time to do so. While she's setting that up, if there's no further questions, I had one more for Patrick. And oh, there is a question at the, go ahead. I should prioritize you.
Your question might be a lot more interesting. But thanks anyways. Adam Schlosser, MIT. Question for the whole panel, and it kind of blends it kind of echoes a lot of the questions and discussion thus far. But in just thinking about forecasting, long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, I was an ozone forecaster and also did some climate prediction, sort of seasonal to interannual prediction. And I'm sure a lot of you as modelers can appreciate the value of initial conditions. And I'm just wondering, listen, I completely respect the importance of the low cost sensors and sort of validating your models and calibrating your models. But do you feel like that you might be missing a gorilla in the room, which is as you get down to details, and I think there was even a talk yesterday that sort of highlighted this, just the information about the vertical profile of the local atmosphere and that landscape can have a huge impact. I would imagine. I'm sort of outside looking in, but it seems like it has a pretty notable impact on the ability of pollutants to be transported, outside of your area of interest, or just the mixing of the pollutants. Just wondering if you could comment on on that? And are you missing a really important piece of information in terms of your forecasting?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly possible, and it's a good point. I think in the context of the projects that we're talking about specifically, the idea is we're going into an area and we're providing a little bit of a new capability of localized air quality forecasting that wasn't necessarily there before. And I think part of that is going to be a learning process of, how well is this really working in the city? Do they need to invest more in running a regional scale model which can resolve some of those things, or is this good enough for what they're trying to do? I think that's kind of the questions we're going to try to answer, and the hope is, I think that was sort of the hope for Santiago, Chile specifically, the region we're looking at. It's a very interesting topography with the mountains and then going down to the valley. So we're going to try our best to combine what's already available in a way that's relatively simple to spin up for them and to get an additional solution there. But it could very well be the case that it's just not performing where they want it to perform, and they need to invest in developing their own regional modeling capabilities. So I think that's certainly a possible outcome.
Great. Thank you for those responses, and thanks to the audience for these dynamic questions.